is those random acquaintances that make possible
make the world a better place.
6 degrees.
The 6 Degrees Closer podcast is brought to you by Apollo Performance. Apollo socks have it all. The high quality, targeted compression supports joints and reduces swelling. The knit-in energy absorption padding in the heel and ball of the foot has been shown in studies to reduce force, helping you do what you love longer and stronger. This is Beyond a Sock. Welcome to the very first episode of the 6 Degrees Closer podcast. My name's Danny Jensen. I'm joined here with my dad, Jeffrey Jensen. And I just want to give a little breakdown of, why I started this podcast and actually kind of how the podcast works. So very first thing why I started a podcast, I just love to introduce myself to more people. This is kind of something I do on an everyday basis. I tend to love to meet people, and just something that I really thoroughly enjoy in hearing the stories of other people. The other thing is that this podcast is kind of based around the 6 degrees of separation, which many people have heard. This theory kind of says that you're within 6 degrees of any person in the world, 6 degrees of connection. So I think that that's pretty unique, and I'm trying to have my own little group of 6 degrees. And how that's going to work is, for example, you are going to be my first guest ever, which is awesome to have you. And from there, you are going to pick my next guest for me that I do not know. From there, that guest will then pick my next guest, and so on up to 6 degrees away. So I'm hopefully going to meet 5 brand new people that I've never met ever. And so this is going to be pretty exciting for me, hopefully going through this journey. And then also just getting to have some of my friends and closest friends and family on this episode and throughout this show. So without further ado, again, this is my dad, Jeffrey Jensen, and I'll just let you take it away. You tell us about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Danny. Happy to be your guinea pig. No problem. My name's Jeff Jensen, and I grew up in Wisconsin, and you can probably tell by my nasally accent. And I'm currently the dean at the Arizona College of Podiatric Medicine at Midwestern University in the Phoenix area. And just a little personal tidbits. I've been married to Cecilia for 40 years. We had 4 beautiful children. You're number 2 in line. Steve's the oldest, then you, Danny, and then
Best looking though.
Then Jenny and Joe. And really, life's been great. And I told you I'd tell you a little bit about myself and a little bit about what I've done from a professional perspective. I'm a podiatrist. I ran a private practice in Denver, Colorado at Rose Medical Center for 17 years. During that time, I had the opportunity to be involved in lots of research and lots of student and resident training. And in 2010, I had the opportunity to become a dean. So we picked up and kind of moved the family to Miami. And we were in Miami for 7 years. And then I was recruited to Arizona to take on the dean's role, also at the Arizona College of Podiatric Medicine.
Definitely. And can you share a little bit more about some personal interests of yours as well?
So I guess interests change over time, right? And I think it's kind of funny how what you do when you're a youngster with your family kind of carries over throughout your life. So I like to fish. I've done a lot of running over the years, marathons and ultra marathons. I've done a lot of rock climbing and mountaineering, delved into a little bit of scuba diving. For the last 10 years or so, I've been doing a lot of target shooting with shotguns called sporting clays. So happy to touch on any of that too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So for the listeners, my dad is probably one of the most unique people that I know. And so I'm really lucky to have you on the podcast as my, again, like you said, guinea pig. And so the first thing that I really just wanted to touch base about was, I tend to think that me and you have a pretty unique relationship. So for the listeners, a lot of my closest friends know this, but people tend to say that I'm kind of a clone of you, which is, and some people say that just by listening to us in certain ways, people that we've worked with closely. And the very funny part is that it's kind of one of the greatest compliments I can get is being compared to you, only because I'm nowhere near what you have done or anything that I think I will ever do. You've kind of accomplished it all. So it's pretty unique to be compared to you. And I think that the apple really doesn't fall far from the tree, but it definitely falls from the tree. So it's a great compliment for me, just so you know. I really don't take that lightly. So it's awesome.
That's great. I agree with you. I mean, I think back on my life and I've got attributes of my father. He was very determined. He was an accountant. He was very perseverant. And then my mom had kind of a creative aspect to her. She was a school teacher. So you're right. You kind of become part of what the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's touch back on, let's go kind of like the fun side first before we jump into your more professional side. So tell us about your running career, because I think that that's one thing that many people may not know about, especially at least a lot of the people that I'm around. They don't really realize how far in depth you got into running. Very accomplished runner. And then on top of that, just the different types of races that you've run can be quite unique.
Sure. So back when I was in high school, I used to rock climb a lot. And I learned that the more I ran, the lighter I was and the easier it was to rock climb. So once I graduated from high school and I got into college, I didn't have time to rock climb all the time. So I got into running more and more. And my dad kind of duped me one day. He said, "Hey, Jeff, you want to run like half a marathon with me? I'm going to run a marathon in 2 months." And I said, "Sure, I'll join you." And then so I started running with him. And at 13 miles, I felt pretty good. And I just finished the race. So that was my first marathon. Since then, I've done 77 marathons, and it evolved quickly because I wanted to run the Boston Marathon. And back then, I'm talking about, early 80s, you needed to run a sub 250 marathon, which is 6 minutes and 30 seconds per mile, in order to qualify to run in the race. So my brother, Michael, and my good friend Bob and I trained like crazy, Bob Hawley.
Yeah.
And we had our sights set on qualifying for Boston. And we all did in 1984. And then in 1985, I got to run my first Boston Marathon, which is really cool. That was one of my goals. And then once we did that, we started running longer distances because I wasn't blessed with, world-class speed in the 10K or the marathon, but I could run all day long. And so we started doing marathons, and that led to 100K races on the road, which is, I did one in 9 hours, and then 50-mile trail runs around the country, really culminating in a 100-mile race, which was at the time very, very challenging and difficult. Not a lot of people did that. But one year I ran 100 miles at Leadville, Colorado in under 24 hours, which is, not easy to do when you consider you're at 10,000 feet.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely can't do that. So it's pretty funny though. And one thing that you mentioned was that you could run all day. And if you talk back to my soccer teammates back at Ohio State, they would say the exact same thing about me. I definitely wasn't the fastest on the team. Everybody knows who that was. And definitely probably was not the most skilled on the team, but I could keep going. So that was something that, again, it's just like one of those things that I probably picked up from you at some point.
Probably.
Yeah. So no, that's pretty awesome. And then, so tell the listeners a little bit about these 100-mile races. I think it's something that's worth listening to. It's unique.
Well, the whole concept of running 100 miles really stemmed around doing routes through the mountains and going from one place to another. And if you ran a lot of marathons, if you just slowed your pace down, you could literally run most all day long. Yeah. The problem was you got tired, especially when you're running in the mountains and on hills. So we developed a strategy that we would run the flats and the downhills at a pretty good clip, and then we would walk all the uphills. And in Leadville, for example, we figured, oh my gosh, if you could get to the halfway point in 12 hours, you could literally walk every step back the last 50 miles and still break the limit of 30 hours.
Interesting.
And if you're, younger and in better shape, like I used to be, like you are, yeah, I could do that better than I could, now, for example. Yeah. So that evolved then into doing these survival races. So we would go up to Alaska and we'd enter a race, and it was me and my brother and multiple friends over the years. And Ken Greenberg and I went up there many times together. And it was interesting because they'd give you 48 hours to finish. But in order to start, you had to have a sled attached to poles, attached to like a waistband that you would pull for the 100 miles, that had your sleeping bag and your down jacket and all your food and a stove and gas in the event that you got stuck out there because it was minus 20 degrees. and many times. And one time my brother and I, we were exhausted and we were on this Sioux in the river and we decided to take a 3-hour nap. And when I woke up, I looked at my temperature gauge and it was buried at -20. We don't know how cold it was.
Oh man.
But that was always fun. And I like to do it with people. It's like anything. If you're doing it with your friends, it's a lot more fun. I remember one year I was with Ken Greenberg and I was exhausted and he felt pretty good at the time. And I finally said, oh my gosh, Ken, I got to take a break. And I knew we were coming up on an aid station, but I was just really, really tired.
Yeah.
So we decided to camp there for a couple hours. So we woke up in a couple hours. That's all you really can do during a race. Packed all of our stuff together, walked 100 yards around the corner, and there was this big, beautiful tent and the aid station and all the things that we had been waiting for, and just missed it by a little.
You know, you tell these stories and it just makes me feel soft. Soft. You know, I need air conditioning to go to sleep and some heat to wake me up in the morning. You know, I can't get in my car if it's, you know, over 120 degrees. So it's pretty awesome stuff that you used to do. And then let's branch from there, unless you wanted to share any more, onto your probably even more extreme past of mountaineering.
Sure.
And maybe even future, if we want to talk about that.
So I think what was very interesting is my father, when he decided he was going to quit smoking, he started running. And at one point, we as a family used to do these camping trips to Colorado and Washington State. And my dad would say, you know, I'll sign you up for this mountaineering course. You go take the course and then I'll come out and we'll climb mountains together. And with my brother and my mom. I mean, we had a whole family affair. Yeah. So we would do that in the summer and go hiking and whatnot. But, you know, we climbed Mount Rainier as an entire family. Mm-hmm. I would take these courses. I'd learn how to ice climb and crevasse rescue and everything. So that was part of it.
And I will stop you for a second. My grandmother, my dad's mom, was a very active woman.
She ran 50 miles.
Yeah. So it wasn't like this was out of the question for, like, she was right there with you guys. Okay.
So I got a little ahead of myself because we started talking about mountaineering. But when I first started climbing, we were rock climbing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a great point.
And did lots of rock climbing every summer. And
you started that at a pretty young age too.
13 or 14.
And you used to do what? Hitchhike, correct?
Yeah, we used to do that too. I'll share it. Before we got to those days though, please. My mom would take my brother and I like to Devil's Tower in Wyoming. And she would sit at the base of the Devil's Tower with a camera on telephoto. And she'd take pictures of us climbing up Devil's Tower.
Of course.
And I think I was like 16 and my brother was 13 at the time. And so we used to do a lot of rock climbing, and Devil's Lake, Wisconsin was kind of where we learned how to climb, and then Colorado. But when I got older and I had my own rope and I had all my equipment, when I was graduated from high school, the easiest way to travel was to hitchhike because when you got where you were going, you didn't need a car. So I would hitchhike to El Dorado Springs and Boulder, climb for a few weeks, go up to Estes Park. I had friends there, climb, maybe go back to Madison for a couple of weeks. And then I would hitchhike back out to Yosemite Valley and live there for a few weeks and climb every day. But you could hitchhike across the country faster than you could drive because you never had to really sleep because people kept picking you up and giving you a ride. And
that's insane. No, it's quite unique. And then explain to us how, why it stopped, right? Didn't your mom make you come back and go to college?
Oh, yeah. One year I was in Yosemite and we were climbing every day and it was August. And I was flirting with the idea of staying in Yosemite and climbing with my friends. And a moment of sanity hit. And I told my buddy I was climbing with, Dale, I said, I got to pack up and go home. And he's like, oh, why? I said, if I don't register for college next week, my parents will disown me.
Yeah. And I believe you met Mom that semester.
It would have been about a year later.
About the semester after.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so.
What could have been?
No, really. I mean,
Crazy,
it's incredible. So,
yeah.
In fact, one of the deals that Mom and I made when we got married, that if I ever had the opportunity, I could climb Mount McKinley.
Yeah.
And so ultimately I climbed Mount McKinley with two of my good friends, Scooter Metcalf and Dave Tile. And we climbed Kilimanjaro together. We climbed Aconcagua in Argentina together.
Do you want to give a little background for our listeners of why these mountains are important?
Sure. So the 7 summits are the 7 summits that are the highest on every continent.
Yeah.
So Mount Kilimanjaro is 19,000 plus in Africa. Aconcagua is almost 23,000 feet above sea level in Argentina. And then Denali is the highest mountain in North America at 20,300 or so.
Yeah. And which one was most difficult and why is that?
So living in Colorado all those years, we used to run up mountains and hike up mountains and scramble and climb. And so Aconcagua was very similar to that. So was Kilimanjaro. The challenge for Aconcagua is it was 23,000 feet and we had horrific storms. My buddy Scooter and I were stuck at 17,000 feet for 5 or 6 days. And he was an experienced mountaineer and I was just kind of going with. And when everybody was going down to base camp, he said, Jeff, we're going to settle down here. We're going to wait out this storm. And when the weather clears, we're going for the summit. So we went from 17,000 to almost 23,000 up and back in a day. We didn't even put a high camp into place at 19,000. We just went for the summit. And so that was really cool. But Mount McKinley was the hardest mountain I've ever climbed, Denali.
Yeah.
You fly into a glacier at 5,000 feet. And it took us 16 days to get to the top with some bad weather, but we acclimated as we went. It was extremely cold, but we were very fortunate. We got great weather the last few days. We went from base camp at 14,000 to the high camp at 17, and we summited on a day that was probably 15 degrees with no wind.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was
That's
beautiful.
awesome. And now, very few people have probably know this, but it's something that me and you have talked about recently. You're flirting with the idea of climbing Everest.
I don't know that I'm flirting with it.
You are. You definitely are flirting with the idea. But tell us why Everest and is that really a true goal?
Yeah, I don't know that I can do it now that I'm 60-ish years old. But you know what? I'd like to keep training and stay in decent shape. And if, I wouldn't rule anything out ultimately if I got in good shape and I had the opportunity.
Yeah. I'm trying to convince my dad to let me go with him for that. So we're going to see how that goes out. So, okay. So, that's kind of, when did you last climb? When was that? What year was, Denali was your last one, or Kilimanjaro was your last one?
Kilimanjaro was probably almost 15 years ago now.
15 years ago.
Yep.
Okay. I remember that pretty clearly. You came back with like some really cool stuff. You traded up there with what are they, the Sherpas?
Yeah, we left everything we had.
It's really cool.
I think the lasting memory of Africa was how poor people are there.
Yeah. And
my good friend, I was with David Tile. We got to have tours of the HIV clinics in Arusha and Moshi, and the environment which they deliver medical care is just amazing. Dirt on the ground.
Do you want to share real quick? Again, sorry, I keep busting in on this. Why you and Dave kind of went to those. You guys are both doctors.
Yep.
You guys both work together.
Yep.
So give maybe a little brief synopsis of Dave and your friendship, and then why you guys would climb all these mountains together.
Sure. Well, Dave Tile was an anesthesiologist. Unfortunately, Dave passed away from pancreatic cancer last year.
Yeah.
But back in the late 90s and early 2000s, Dave and I used to work together in the operating room all the time. I'd have cases and he'd be my anesthesiologist. And so we spent days together working in the operating room.
Yeah.
So he and I were good friends, and he had a more extensive climbing background than I had. And then my buddy Scooter was actually a ranger on Denali. Yeah. So he had done some incredible rescues of climbers that were in trouble. So what happened on Denali was Dave and I together flew into the mountain and worked our way up to base camp to 14,000 feet. And then Scooter, who was on the mountain, joined us to go to high camp and then the summit.
That's awesome.
I think one of the greatest things about that climb was that the high camp at 17,000 feet had a cache where they would have food and things that if anybody got in trouble, there was food and fuel and things. And half the people that climb Mount McKinley don't summit because of weather.
Yeah.
So Scooter told Dave and I, he goes, don't worry, guys. If we get up to high camp, there's enough food up there. We can stay there for a month if we have to and wait for the weather to clear. And Dave and I looked at each other and thought, we got patience and work. But we said, let's see what happens. But we ended up climbing it in good weather.
You had some good weather. Okay. So back to being in Africa and seeing all of that.
Right.
Quite the experience, obviously. A little bit different circumstances than you usually see out here. How did that kind of either affect you or what was that like when you were there, seeing all that stuff firsthand?
So, we did the climb was wonderful, and we met some just wonderful people, and it was hard looking at the poverty though. When we did a safari, we took lots of pictures, but I think that leaves a lasting effect. It's hard to appreciate how good we have it here in the States. I
think that's one thing recently that a lot of people are struggling to see. Just we have it really good. Okay, cool. So that's a lot of your mountaineering. I'm sure there's probably more. I know, every time I seem to turn around and you hear about whether it's another climbing death or these really famous guys, my dad always turns to me and goes, yeah, I at one point climbed with him as well. And it seems like you've climbed with everybody. I know you're very modest about that, but you have had some really cool experiences with some really famous and influential climbers throughout the years.
I did, and I was very fortunate because they were better than I was, and I learned a lot from them.
Yeah.
But for an example, I had the opportunity to go bouldering and climb with Jim Birdwell, who's considered like one of the greatest rock climbing alpinists in the history of climbing, kind of the father of rock climbing, along with Royal Robbins and a few others.
Yeah.
But those are tremendous experiences. And I cherish them. I keep their pictures.
Was he far and away better than you? You could just tell the second you got up there. I know you used to be very good at
not like that. He had done the first one-day ascent of El Capitan.
Yeah.
And later that same year, he did a route called the Pacific Ocean Wall, which was the hardest technical climb probably in the world at that point. So the fact that he would invite me to go bouldering and my brother to go bouldering with him was awesome.
That is pretty cool. Yeah. So we went through a little bit of your running past, a little bit of your mountaineering past, a little bit of rock climbing past. Then you kind of have transitioned a little bit, right? So, I know you used to fish all the time then, but between fishing and sporting clays shooting that you do now quite a bit and travel around for, talk to us about those few things that
Sure.
I know you have a passion for it.
So in about 2008, I had spent time coaching you kids in soccer and baseball, and they were getting older and they were getting better, and I no longer could do justice to their furthering their sports. So one day I was out with another friend and we were doing a tower shoot, it's called, where you shoot pigeons and chukars and
all the above.
Yeah. And, but in order to warm up for that, my friend brought me down on the sporting clays course. And all of a sudden I was shooting things rolling on the ground, coming over my head. And I wasn't used to that because when I was a kid, my dad used to shoot trap and I used to go along with him.
All clay targets. And
clay targets, right. They're little, 108 millimeter orange targets, what you see for traps, things like that. And so at that point, I thought, wow, this is a lot of fun. And I took a bunch of lessons and competed a lot. And one thing led to another. And then I found myself, meeting friends that were competing on the national tour around the country. So I kind of joined that. And then the same friends were traveling overseas to shoot in world championships. And so then, I've been very fortunate. I've shot all over Europe, from Spain, Portugal, France, Italy, Great Britain, Hungary. And I don't win championships doing that, but I get to participate.
You don't always win championships, but you have, haven't you?
The best I've ever shot, I won the U.S. Open Veterans FITASC event in 2017.
Yeah. So not just like run of the mill. So yeah. So you take it pretty serious. So remember we talked early in the podcast about how the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So this is kind of how I feel about pickleball right now. I've just kind of met some really great people, travel around the country sometimes, get to like do what we love. It's pretty unique, but obviously somebody paved that path. It doesn't just, not everybody does that. So I think that I can thank you for that.
Cool. You gotta live out your passion,
Yeah.
And so life's short.
Yeah, definitely. And
gotta make the most of it.
Definitely. So there is one one thing I thought was funny, and this is just between our relationship that we've had throughout the years. And, me and my dad are obviously very close, but, one thing that we've done quite a bit is we will end up in random cities, or we'll be in Tucson, Arizona, for example, and we end up just at the casino sometimes together. And I would say that some of my very, very best memories are just laughing at the table, watching cards come up that are wild, and or throw you for a loop, and or winning some big hands that we need to win, or losing some big hands that we didn't need to lose, and enjoying those moments. It's kind of been, that's one of my best memories is some of these like gambling little adventures that we've had. And I know you kind of probably enjoy that as well. But other than those few things, I think that you've kind of lived quite the fun experience of life, right? So,
so far, so
yeah,
good.
so far. And then you're gonna climb Everest. We're gonna push him as a community to climb Everest, and bring me along. And then let's go into more of like a little bit more professional. We don't have to talk about everything, but let's talk about kind of how you started as being a doctor, why you got into podiatry.
Sure.
Podiatry, for the listeners, is a foot doctor, profession. And so you're a podiatrist. So carry it away, whatever you want to say.
So when I was working on my master's degree, I was introduced to the possibility of going into medicine.
Yeah.
And my family had a podiatrist in Madison, Dr. Hummel, who was like the podiatrist to all the runners. So he's a sports medicine specialist, but he'd also done surgeries, like my mom's bunion and things. So I was familiar with podiatry. And the challenge was I hadn't taken enough chemistry and physics yet. And so if I was going to go a medical path, I had all the biologies and things. But so I made the decision to do that and try to get in and see what it would happen. And sometimes you just got to dive in head first. And I was married at the time. Mom and I had been married for a couple of years. And she was very supportive, and she said, go for it. And she was an accountant already. She had gotten her master's degree in tax accounting.
Yeah.
She worked for Price Waterhouse, and she was doing well. So she said, yeah, you should definitely go for it. So I did. And podiatry school was great. I made lifelong friends. I learned about, taking care of patients and the human perspective of an honor and a privilege to actually do surgery on fellow humans, right?
Yeah.
So I did a residency program in Detroit, Michigan, that's where Steve was born.
Yep.
And then when I went into practice, I joined a practice in Denver, Colorado that was mostly doing research. So when I joined that practice, I was doing clinical trials, started to get kind of away from some of the sports medicine aspects and doing more diabetic foot care, which is a whole unique experience because these patients don't have feeling in their feet and all kinds of problems. So while I was doing that, I started doing NIH grants, and I had the privilege of working with just phenomenal, some of the leaders in the wound care space. So, Dr. Boswick, Paul Brand, Bob Warner. I mean, these are just incredible people that have their name on research projects and medical articles for decades. And through those NIH grants, I had a vision of developing a product that could help patients with diabetes. And through a combination of NIH grants and Department of Defense grants, because we were trying to make a device like an exoskeleton for a soldier so that if he injured himself in the field, he could self-rescue. Yeah. So we took all those technologies together and we developed a product that we put on the market. It's called the TCC Easy. And that's really done very well over the last 12, 13 years.
Yeah, quite unique. So yeah, you were a podiatrist by trade. For what? How many years was that?
I was in practice for 17 years.
17 years, all in Denver, I believe. Yep. I was born in Denver. And then what year did you leave to become a dean? What year was that?
2010.
2010. So, and then since 2010, now sitting here in 2023, you've been a dean at two different schools now.
Yeah. And originally I got involved in starting a residency program and training fourth-year students that would come through our program. So I felt I had a knack for education. And so when I had an opportunity in 2010, I applied for a position in Miami, and I was fortunate to get that position. I stayed in that role for 4 years, and then I became the senior director of research at the entire university until I got a call, kind of a recruitment call from the previous dean here to potentially come to Arizona.
Yeah, quite unique. And so do you, is it, between the professions and all this kind of stuff, can you share with people how much research actually goes involved? And I know you started a full research, whether it was some sort of laboratory and all those kind of things down in at Barry, and then you're doing similar things.
Yeah. Miami was unique because I kind of figured, geez, if I can get all these NIH grants in private practice and Department of Defense grants, think what I could do with university backing.
Yeah.
So when I went to Barry, we ended up getting a $2 million research grant from the Department of Defense to develop a new treatment for multi-drug resistant bacteria that are resistant to typical antibiotics. And that was fascinating. I thoroughly enjoyed that. While I was there, our PA program also got a research grant. Now, mind you, this is back in 2010. They were doing distance learning like we do today on Zoom and Teams.
Absolutely.
But we were doing that with the Caribbean islands, trying to start a PA program, physician assistant program there, so that local residents could become a physician assistant and stay on the islands to help treat people that live there.
Yeah, quite amazing.
So back then, I mean, streaming was not common.
Yeah.
It was extremely expensive and it was new technology. So while I wasn't directly involved in carrying that program out, it was really fun to see it come to fruition.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, and then I know you touched earlier in the podcast on just kind of in a few times actually recently, talking about your impact on students and how you can hopefully kind of influence the next generation of podiatrists.
I think that's really important in any profession, right? You're trying to train up the next generation of doctors that are going to represent the profession and treat patients well. So when I was in the residency program, we trained residents. They'd already gone through podiatry school, and we had fourth-year students. So when you go to become a dean at the colleges, you're recruiting students to come into the profession that are just finishing undergrad.
Yeah.
And many of them know what they want to be, but not all. And all students in any field need to have good mentors, and they need to have guidance, and they need people that have been successful to show them how to be successful. So I'm very, very proud of our students over the years. I'll see some at national meetings giving podium talks, and their incredible research and incredible surgeries. And I remember when that person applied to podiatry school, like when I was in Miami.
That's fascinating.
So I'm very proud of our students, very proud of our residents. They do a great job.
Yeah, no, I really, I think that's awesome. Now I'm sure that didn't just come, I mean, I probably came a little bit naturally to you, but did you have somebody back in, whether it was college or before college, that kind of showed you that kind of path of how to do that, how to be a mentor?
Absolutely.
And who were they?
So when I was in podiatry school, we had phenomenal professors, and I respected all of them. I know like Dr. Shearer in biomechanics, Dr. Gerbert in surgery. And then when I got into residency, I was fortunate enough to place in a residency in Michigan that was one of the leading residency training programs in the country. And Dr. Irv Cannett was the director, and he's been very prominent in our profession for decades. He passed away 9 years ago. And then Dr. Bill Todd also, just incredible teachers, incredible surgeons, incredible leaders. And just to give you an example, back then it was like early 90s, right? And I was a resident, and we didn't have cell phones back then. And when the phone would ring, I'd answer the phone, or we'd have an answering machine. But one Sunday morning, the phone rang, and I answered the phone, and I said, hello, and it says, Dr. Jensen, it's Dr. Cannett. And I thought, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would think.
He said, I know you're a Packer fan, and I've got tickets to the Lions-Packer game today. Would you like to go with me? And I said, oh my gosh, of course. And so this is interesting because talk about paying it forward. So we're at the game, And, I said something like, well, I'm happy to buy lunch. And he said, your money's not good here. He said, I would fully expect that when you become a leader in this profession, you'll be providing tickets and food for your students and residents. He in a very deep voice.
Of course.
Another time, Dr. Todd called me on a weekend. He says, what are you doing on Tuesday? I said, I'm either in surgery or in the clinic, one or the other. And he says, well, I want to know if you want to go duck hunting with me. And I said, really? And he goes, oh yeah, I've got everything you need. So we went out layout hunting on Lake St. Clair, and then we were shooting pool and having fun. And then next thing I know, it was 6 a.m. the next day. And he was like my boss again.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of memories and personal experiences outside of just teaching surgery and medicine.
Absolutely. And you can kind of pass that on to your newest generation of.
We try. I take students shooting targets and
Do it.
You went with me a couple times in Miami. We took students out fishing on the
we did
the Gulf Stream.
I do remember that. Yeah. So we've done quite a fair amount of fishing together as well.
Yes.
I know I almost just broke away from your professional side of things, but we didn't really go very far into the fishing topic. So a few years ago, we actually did the professional walleye tour, which was quite unique. Give us your take on that the first, and then we'll talk about other fishing stories.
So we've fished a lot over the years, mostly deep sea fishing, but we were interested in walleye fishing because up in Green Bay, it's a mecca. Green Bay and in Lake Erie is a mecca for walleye fishing. So I figured the best way to learn how to catch walleyes is to fish with the professionals.
Yeah.
So
it's probably the best way to do anything is be around professionals.
Absolutely. If you want to learn anything, that's a shortcut to proficiency, right?
Absolutely.
So Danny and I decided we were going to be co-anglers on the professional walleye tour, which means we get placed in boats with professional fishermen at these tournaments for one professional fisherman each day. Yeah. So I'd be with pros each day and Danny was with pros each day. And we actually were part of the competition because the fish we caught went towards our tallies for the day.
Yeah.
But we just had a blast. I mean, we had so much fun and we learned from some of the finest fishermen in the world.
Yeah.
And one of the takeaways from me was I always thought everybody knew where the fish were and it was hard to catch them. But what we learned was with today's electronics, walleye fishing is very much like hunting. You spot the fish on your electronics and you know where to cast towards them or where to pull your baits by them. It was a learning experience for me. And I foresee a lot of walleye fishing down the road.
My dad gets out of boats and, his pro is sitting there going, gosh, Jeff is just awesome. He can do everything. He can, rig lines, everything you can, and my pros are getting out of the boat. Like, I don't know how I pulled this guy into my boat, and they were basically showing me the ropes as we were going. It was quite unique. Obviously a huge learning curve for me. I know you had done a little bit more fishing, kind of in your past than I had, but wow, what an experience that was. And it was fun. I mean, obviously we love competition. But
yeah, we fished a couple times in South Dakota. We fished in Lake Erie. We fished on Green Bay in a storm with like 10-foot waves.
Yeah, I'm not scared of much, but I was scared that. That's when I'm pretty sure. We were hitting some waves. I remember we were coming back, and I was just like, I was white knuckling the handles, and we were hitting those waves so hard, I thought the boat was gonna fall apart. And me and you both come back, and me and my pro didn't catch anything that day, and it was a little bit frustrating. And I get back just hoping you had a better day, and you actually had a worse day.
I was just glad my Dramamine kicked in, and I felt good.
Oh my gosh, that was a wild day. I mean, just fantastic. But then you've also done fishing kind of around the world. You've fished for many different, you've done a lot of trophy fishing. So if you want to kind of go into that, I know you've done some blue marlin fishing. We had an awesome trip to Guatemala.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we've always loved fishing, and we really got into fishing, deep water fishing when we lived in Florida. Yeah. But I always had a goal to catch a marlin. And so I went on many, many trips and didn't catch a marlin until we went to Cabo. Me and my partner in practice, Eric Chicola, went. And finally I got into this marlin and I got him to the boat and took pictures. And I was exhausted. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm just thrashed. And then Eric, because he's younger and much stronger, ended up catching like 4 marlin that day. I just sat back and drank beer and had fun. I was like, my mission is accomplished here.
Yeah.
So, but I'd been on fishing trips in Brazil where I felt like, we were on the boat and the waves were so high. I could see the waves, on both sides of the boat, higher than the boat. And
Yeah.
I have a weak stomach for that. Sometimes I have to be careful.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's fun experiences though, right? Like
Totally.
after you're done and safe back on shore, it's a good experience.
Yeah.
And then we went to Guatemala. What year was that, do you think?
2014, maybe 20,
yeah, somewhere in there. I think I thought I was in high school still. No, maybe I was in high school still. So it was probably 2013-ish. We caught 38 sailfish in 2 days.
At one point we had 4 of them on at one time.
Yeah. And
then we had to recruit Celia
yeah.
to help get one in because someone was in the bathroom. She's like, oh my gosh, she's caught like 1 fish and it's
in her. Yeah.
And it's sailfish.
Yeah. She has never caught another fish. She doesn't actually like the water as much as we do. No, I tend to like the water. So, other than that, so, let's talk really quickly about, our family. Just, it's something that I'm not going to be able to talk to everybody about. And so it's kind of unique that I get to talk about it. You met mom at what, 19 or 20, and then were married shortly after?
We got married in college at 20 years old.
Yeah. And now you're what, early 60s?
61.
61. And you guys have been married for 41 years.
Yep.
Quite a lot of people look at that and go, that is not the norm. So, honestly, it's really awesome to have you guys as role models. But also, there's got to be some tricks and tips and tricks that you can share, not only with me, but hopefully a lot of other people out there. What is it?
Well, Celia is awesome. I mean, she's incredible. She's a great wife and a great mom and very supportive in everything. But I think, you find a compatible spouse and you're a team and you work together. And, when I was in school, mom was working.
Yeah.
So she was helping defray the costs of school and living expenses. And then when I was in residency program, we had Steve.
Yeah.
And that was stressful because mom was a CPA and I was a resident.
Yeah.
And so we shared a lot of, sometimes I'd run to daycare and pick up Steve and then go back to the hospital for a lecture. And mom was the same. She would bring him to daycare in the morning and work and then figure out how to make it work. Right.
Yeah.
And then when you were born in 1994, mom stopped working at that point. I was already, practice and doing well. So, to raise a family and, it's not easy. And
No, definitely not.
you don't want your kids living at daycare all the time.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of compromise and, mom's done just a phenomenal job helping not only raise kids and with the end result being incredible, but when I wanted to start a small medical device company, she was supportive of that. She did a lot of the accounting for that company in the early days. And she was well-versed in writing grants.
Yeah.
And so she could speak to the financial end of it and I could speak to the medical end of it. And then I just had to pull together the rest of the team. So even though we've talked about my grants and my patents and all that kind of thing, Celia was a significant part of every bit of that.
Yeah. No, it is pretty cool. It's cool to see, sometimes I tell my friends, oh yeah, my parents have been married for 40 years. And they're like, your parents like 80? 75? Like young parents. So it's pretty unique. So I'm really blessed to have you guys there. So, and I know Steve, Jen, and Joey. So I obviously probably have not shared this with anybody, but, or anybody that's listening, but I have an older brother, Steve, 2 years older than me, younger sister, Jenny, 4 years younger than me. Joey's 3 years younger than Jenny. And essentially everybody's kind of doing their own thing. Steve now has a kid. What's it like being a grandparent? Kind of.
Yeah, it's awesome. Little Drew's a wonderful little boy and another baby on the way.
Yeah.
A little girl going to be born in the next month or so. So we love being grandparents.
Yeah, no, it's a gift. And then I tend to think that mom was actually meant to be a grandmother.
No doubt.
Like that's what her life goal was.
100%.
Yeah. Being a mother is great, but being a grandmother for her is like, you can see a different sort of light in her eyes. She can give back the baby when she, so it's fun to see. But other than that, really, from a family side of things and growing up, we always looked up to you and mom, obviously, but you were also the coach of so many of our sports, specifically baseball and soccer for a little bit and doing a few different things. But what's your take on having, your kids that are playing underneath you and trying to push them to be their best, but also allowing them to kind of choose their own paths? Because I know you guys probably wanted to push me a little bit more into baseball than what I did, but you guys kind of let me do what I wanted to do. So talk on that for a little bit.
Well, from, speaking for many parents out there, raising kids is awesome, but it's very challenging. And so when your kids are playing sports, you're hoping that you're going to teach them some lessons, right? You're teaching them to be a gracious winner and accepting losing if you did your best. And we mostly wanted all of you, Steve, we followed him early on in the game, soccer and baseball. And we always emphasize, we want you to have fun. We want you to be a good sport. We want you to do your best. You can't ask for more than that. Yeah. So it's kind of our theme.
Yeah. No, I remember you'd ask us that every day. And I was always like, well, I won. You didn't really care too much. You guys were more worried about those other three aspects. So pretty cool to grow up in that environment. Other than that, really, is if there's anything else that you really want to share with the community, anything that you think is worthwhile to share on the podcast, I think we'd love to hear anything. The family stuff is great. Professionally, I found kind of an outlet in writing grants and getting patents for products and things. So that was great. I think things I'm most proud of are my kids, Steve and you and Jenny and Joe, and my students. I'd love watching them succeed also. Yeah. So it's, as you get older, you realize that giving back's what it's all about. You no longer take, you give back. Yeah. Yeah. I'm still in the taking portion of it. Just messing around. But thank you for being the real guinea pig.
My pleasure.
Obviously. And then thank you for being a role model through everything I've done. And then thank you for the listeners. I think that my dad kind of has so much to give. If there's anybody that ever wanted to reach out to him, I know you actually one of your students right now is one of my best friends, which is kind of unique. So if there's anything that my dad could ever help anybody with, he obviously sits there with open arms, and that's one of the best parts about you. You kind of are always there if I needed you. So with that said, I appreciate everything. Thank you for listening to the 6 Degrees Closer podcast. You are now choosing our next guest.
Absolutely.
Who is going to be on the podcast next week. So with that said, you kind of have a lot on your plate. This is like your impact to more of the podcast is which direction this wants to go. And I have no say over it. All I ask is that it's not somebody that I know.
No problem.
And I know I know a bunch of your friends, so this one's going to be probably a little bit hard on you. But yeah, just somebody I don't know, and I'd love to get to know them a little bit as well. So
thanks, Danny, and thanks for doing this. And I wish you the best of luck in it.
Thanks.
You'll do well.
Yeah. So thanks for listening to the 6 Degrees Closer podcast. I'm Danny Jensen again, and we will see you every Tuesday. Have a great day.
It is those random acquaintances that make possible.
They make the world a better place.